good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, respectively. This year's symposium, themed Break the Bias, Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow, is hosted in collaboration with 5 notable institutions and bodies, that is, International Finance Corporation, Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiative, UN Women, United Nations Global Compact, and the World Federation of Exchanges. I am Mfoniso Udo, a strategy analyst at Nigerian Exchange Group PLC, and I will be joined by Tolulope Obajamo to compare today's events. Over to you, Tolu.
My apologies. Thank you, Mfoniso. Welcome everyone once again. I am Tolulope Obajamo, a strategic business manager at NGX Regulation Limited. Today marks our 8th time gathering together to commemorate this day and our operating exchange, NGX. We'll be joining over 100 stock exchanges around the world to ring the bell for gender equality. Women bring different experiences, perspectives, and skills to the workplace and business environment. And today serves to appreciate women from all walks of life. In the next hour and a half, we'll be listening to messages from industry leaders and subject matter experts as they share insights on the challenges and opportunities of creating a gender equal world. This event promises to be an exciting one, and we urge you to listen attentively and participate fully. You can send in your comments and questions via the Q&A box on your screen. We also encourage everyone to work with the limited time we have, as we need to close the market by 2:30 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Tolu. So today's event will run in 2 parts. That we have the webinar and then the closing gong ceremony. So with no further ado, I will invite the Group Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, Nigerian Exchange Group PLC, Mr. Oscar N. Oyema, to deliver his opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ufon, and thank you, Tolu. The Honorable Minister of Women Affairs, Dame Pauline Talon, OFR, the Honorable Minister of State for the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, Her Excellency Ambassador Mariam Katagon, distinguished board members of Nigerian Exchange Group PLC and its subsidiaries, our partners, the International Finance Corporation, represented by Mr. Kevin Njirani, Regional Director, Southern Africa and Nigeria, and Mr. Kalim Shah, Senior Country Manager, Nigeria, United Nations Global Compact Network, Nigeria, represented by Ms. Naomi Nwokolo, Executive Director, the UN Women, represented by Mr. Lassana Wonu, Deputy Representative, Nigeria and ECOWAS, the World Federation of Exchanges, Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative, distinguished speakers and panels, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Board of Directors and Executive Management of Nigerian Exchange Group PLC, it is with great honor that I welcome you all to this year's International Women's Day celebration. I am especially grateful to our special guests of honor, speakers, panel discussants, and all our guests for honoring us with your esteemed presence. When I learned of this year's theme, Break the Bias, I had deep reflection, indeed, deep personal reflection on the concept of bias, both conscious and unconscious, and how a bias in our conception of how the world should work is often created by traditions, culture, norms that have over the years influenced our decision-making process. In my self-reflection, I give thought to the potential influence on our decision-making. In my self-reflection, I give thought to the potential impact of today's highly interconnected, fast-paced society on these age-old traditions and I was astounded by the thought of why some age-old traditions have stubbornly remained relevant and in some cases, outrightly dominant. In today's world, despite the availability of modern-day tools such as fast-paced internet connectivity, social media, global entertainment industry, mobile telephony, amongst others, women embody half of the world's talent and skill base, as well as more than half of the global purchasing power. More so, women are increasingly being positioned as partners and collaborators in achieving economic growth and development. However, this cannot be achieved if they are constrained by cultural practices and norms. This is why I firmly support this year's theme to break the bias. I believe that a conscious effort is required to move the needle and change the age-old norms that restrict women's social and economic progress. At NGS Group of Companies, we remain committed to playing our part by implementing various initiatives aimed at promoting gender diversity and empowering women. These include improving women's participation across our group. Following our successful demutualization and restructuring, we boast of 2 female board chairs and 1 female chief executive officer within our group. The implementation of suitable policies that promote gender equality, such as our zero tolerance policy against activities that promote discrimination or discriminatory behavior in relation to gender, including any form of sexual harassment. We are pleased to continue our partnership with International Finance Corporation to implement the first multi-stakeholder country gender program, the Nigeria to Equal program, which remains a leading platform for private sector companies to improve their sustainability performance across board. The global finance industry has a critical role to play in achieving gender equality. The finance industry has served to efficiently allocate resources to areas of the economy where it is most needed, whilst maximizing return in value. As the world clamors for increased reallocation of finance to address the Sustainable Development Goals, climate change, and other pressing issues, there is a pressing need for stakeholders to reconsider the role of finance in addressing gender issues. After all, if promoting gender issues was conceived as a business opportunity or a transaction, favorable policies would need to be implemented to enable investors recoup their investments. I am keen on today's discussions, which will center on key policy initiatives that could empower women, as well as innovative approaches to deploy sustainable finance to achieve gender equality. We will be privileged to listen to a diverse group of speakers who have recorded commendable achievements in their industry or have championed the cause for women empowerment with notable results. I urge you to join me in participating fully in the discussions to gain insights from our speakers on how we can leverage the challenges of the pandemic to create a gender equal world. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in line with the theme for this year's celebration, I boldly state my commitment to the gender equality cause, to break the bias and open doors for women to achieve their full potential. I hope today's deliberations will inspire you to equally choose to support the cause to achieve gender equality. Let us break the bias and create a gender equal world. Thank you for your attention and happy International Women's Day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oyema, for the warm remarks. We thank you for your commitment to gender equality. At this point, I would like to yield the floor to Ms. Naomi Nwokolo, Executive Director, United Nations Global Compact Network, Nigeria, to deliver a goodwill message. Ms. Nwokolo, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, participants, and our esteemed members. Please permit me to stand on existing protocols. I am honored to speak to you today and add my voice to recognize the unsung heroes of our women, of our country, our women who through their knowledge, empathy, resilience, and boundless energy are making an indelible impact to our country's development. Every year on March 8th, the world is reminded of the significant contributions made by women. This year's International Women's Day theme, Break the Bias, Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow, sends a strong message about the exceptional effort needed to achieve systemic advancement of women's rights. And it is great that we are all gathered here today, celebrating, albeit virtually, joining 110 exchanges and CCPs around the world to show bold leadership for SDG 5. This year's International Women's Day theme aims to condense into a single sentence the idea that the world must now come to embrace the importance of women's full and effective involvement in decision-making in general. The topic clearly demands equity in the areas of equal pay for work of equal value, gender-responsive supply chain practices, and zero tolerance against sexual harassment in the world of work. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 situation indeed illuminated the systemic barriers and entrenched gender norms that we must now overcome. They are not new challenges, but there is indeed a heightened urgency to act. The social and economic impacts of the pandemic are affecting and still affecting women disproportionately around the world. And there is a real concern that the global gender gap is widening rather than narrowing. So as partners and change agents, we cannot allow this to stand. Slowing down or backtracking on our progress towards gender equality will not only affect women, it will have an impact on everyone. It will sap the strength of our economies and hold the world back from achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. It is important to note that gender equality is a fundamental human right, and 99 targets of the Sustainable Development Goals are tied to human rights. So a disregard of gender equality is a disregard of fundamental human rights. As we deliberate on sustainable gender equality measures today to break the bias, may we remember that the meaningful progress towards gender equality requires holistic strategies. That is why over a decade ago, the United Nations Global Compact and UN Women joined forces to launch the Women Empowerment Principles, outlining the range of ways that businesses can ensure respect and support for women in their workplaces, across their value chains, and in the communities where they operate. The theme, Breaking the Bias, fully aligns with the work of the United Nations Global Compact Network Nigeria. Through our Target Gender Equality Program, the UN Global Compact supports our companies in setting and meeting ambitious corporate targets to advance gender equality. We do this through facilitated performance analysis, capacity building workshops, peer-to-peer learning, and multi-stakeholder dialogues. Companies have learned to draft ambitious targets for women's representation and leadership. The Target Gender Equality Initiative was successfully run in Nigeria and 45 countries in the world in 2021, and the commitment is clearly in place, as over 6,200 CEOs have signed to the Women Empowerment Principles Statement of Support. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in today's Nigeria, we cannot afford to be behind in addressing women's exclusions from decision-making. Women's full and effective participation in all aspects of development, as well as equitable chances for leadership at all levels, must be achieved. So we urge organizations and governments at all levels to join our cause, sign up to the Women Empowerment Principles, and promote inclusivity to enable women thrive. I'd like to use this opportunity to acknowledge the tremendous and accomplishments of women in Nigeria and throughout the world who continue to push for gender equality and more female representation in many fields. In order to achieve good governance, as a country, we need to build on the momentum of our foremothers by enhancing women's leadership and encouraging their effective and active engagement in local, national, and international decision-making processes. Before I close, I want to state that our key message is clear. A seat at the table is no longer enough. Our voices must be heard and have equal weight. We must not only look at diversity numbers, but focus on establishing truly inclusive workplaces. Gender equality has emerged as a top corporate sustainability issue, and it is gaining traction worldwide. Yet progress is still slow, and most companies have not sufficiently translated commitment into action. When businesses take actions on gender equality, the impact has multiplying effects. Government policies supporting women are reinforced, civil society is encouraged to take steps towards supporting women, and harmful, dated, and social norms are changed to be more inclusive. The United Nations Global Compact and the local network in Nigeria remain committed in mobilizing sustainable companies to set realistic and ambitious targets to bridge the gender equality gap, and we invite you to work with us. On this note, I want to thank our partners, the Nigerian Exchange Group, the International Finance Corporation, the World Federation of Exchanges, and UN Women for the privilege of partnership on this great day and event. As we accelerate the pace of change to create the sustainable future that we want, may we continue to be intentional about breaking the bias, both conscious and unconscious biases, and setting measurable targets towards achieving gender equality. Because equality, ladies and gentlemen, means good business. And when women are empowered, everybody benefits. Thank you for your time, and I wish us all a productive deliberation today that will birth more actions on delivering Goal 5 in Nigeria. Happy International Women's Day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nwokolo, for your goodwill message. I will now invite Mr. Lansana Wone, the Deputy Representative, Nigeria and ECOWAS UN Women, to deliver his goodwill message.
Thank you very much, everyone. Unfortunately, Mr. Lansana Wone has been caught up with other activities, and he sends his deep apologies. I'll be representing him today to give the goodwill message. My name is Chukwuemeka Onimadu, and I'm the National Economist for UN Women. So standing on all existing protocols, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to be with you today to commemorate the International Women's Day for 2022. On behalf of UN Women, I am deeply honored to be delivering this goodwill message. I would like to first thank the Nigerian Exchange Group for the opportunity and commend the exchange for its consistent advocacy to reducing the existing gender gap and promoting gender-smart solutions in the private sector through the Nigeria to Equal Program Initiative. This year, the theme for the International Women's Day is Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow. This recognizes the growing concern of the adverse and lasting impacts of climate shocks on Nigeria's environment, economy, and social development, as well as the opportunities and potentials presented for women and girls to play a leadership role as positive change makers in mitigating and adapting to these climate shocks. Similarly, the theme for this symposium, Break the Bias, Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow, focuses on ongoing efforts implemented by corporate organizations to close the gender gap within different business units, especially in leadership. At UN Women, we recognize women as essential agents of change for sustainable and inclusive prosperity in the private sector. However, in Nigeria, as other countries, there still exists a considerable gender gap between men and women in the private sector. Across corporate leadership, compensation and work flexibility, and the gender responsiveness of corporate responsibilities, gender inequality is perpetuated by inherent structural enablers and a slow behavioral change process. Thus, attaining significant progress in promoting gender equality and women's economic empowerment in the private sector must not just be deliberate, but wholesome. As part of UN Women's normative and programmatic functions, we have proposed a menu of policies and programmatic agendas, of which, if implemented, would help close the gender gap and advance gender equality in the private sector. A focal agenda has been our drive to ensure sustainable financing options for gender equality and women's economic empowerment in Nigeria. UN Women is currently engaging the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, and the Debt Management Office on the feasibility of launching a gender bond for Nigeria. Furthermore, we are also currently seeking for effective pathways to leverage on the private sector funds for investments that specifically target women-owned businesses and industries dominated by women. These financing agendas align with the federal government National Development Plan, as well as its integrated national financing framework. Another complementary agenda would be promoting improved access to credit for women-led SMEs throughout the value chain. At UN Women, we have advocated for gender-responsive financial products designed for women-owned businesses. Through our flagship Climate Smart Agriculture program, we have been able to increase women farmers' access to credit, land, and an expanded market through digital technology. In addition, UN Women has recently rolled out an affirmative procurement initiative that focuses on improving access to national and international public tenders for women-led businesses. Women's meaningful participation and leadership at all tiers of the corporate ladder is essential to achieving the promise of 2030 agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. UN Women is open to collaborating with the Nigerian Exchange Group in developing a protocol for commitments towards mainstreaming gender considerations in the operations of the Nigerian Exchange Group and listed companies in the exchange. At UN Women, we have prioritized participation in decision-making at all tiers, economic empowerment, and the protection of all forms of violence at the workplace. Achieving gender equality and sustainable development in Nigeria's corporate world would require a set of shared underlying values and the acknowledgement that this objective is a complex and multi-year undertaking. Thus, strengthening coordination between the Nigerian Exchange Group, the Nigerian government, UN Women, and other development partners becomes a requisite for identifying the most efficient path towards attaining gender equality today for a sustainable tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oyimadu, PhD, for your goodwill message. Our next session is the keynote address, which will be delivered by Mr. Kevin Njireni, Regional Director, Southern Africa and Nigeria, International Finance Corporation, the IFC.
Thank you very much, Tolu. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm excited to join the Nigerian Exchange Limited, our partners, UN Women and UN Global Compact Network Nigeria, and participating guests as we commemorate the 2022 International Women's Day today. This ceremony is being held alongside more than 120 participating stock exchanges in the Ring the Bell for Gender Equality events around the world. No country, community, or economy can achieve its full potential or meet the challenges of the 21st century without the full and equal participation of women and men, girls and boys. Today's event once again highlights the importance of gender equality for economic development and growth. An issue of even more importance given the devastating economic and social consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic and ongoing climate change impact on women and girls. IFC has long been engaged in efforts at the capital markets level to support women as economic actors. This work includes capacity building efforts for women in leadership, support to regulators on integrating gender indicator, corporate governance codes, co-sponsoring annual Ring the Bell for Gender Equality activities to commemorate International Women's Day, among other key initiatives. We understand the importance of gender balance in the private sector and its link to sustainable development, and use our investment and advisory expertise to support private sector companies to close gender gaps in access to jobs and a variety of assets. Although progress is being made, as evidenced by the closing of some gender indicators, the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report 2021 asserts that another generation of women will have to wait for gender parity. The race to close the global gender gap has increased from 99 years to 135 years, and it will take more than 250 years to bring about parity in the workplace. It is important to emphasize the business case for increasing the participation of women as leaders, entrepreneurs, consumers, employees, and business leaders, because it is not only a moral imperative, but a smart business strategy. Studies show that female talent is among the least utilized economic and business resource globally. For Nigeria, the gender gaps are a result of many challenges, especially the persistent gap at the corporate leadership level, lack of access to finance for women who want to start and grow a business, and limited access to markets through supply chains and procurement opportunities. With the country having the largest economy in Africa and projected to have the 5th largest population in the world by 2026, women, who account for half the population, remain severely underrepresented in the country's private sector. For instance, women represent 50% of the labor force, but less than half of them, around 24%, are in wage and salary jobs. Typically, the odds are stacked against them as they rise in their career. The 2021 report, Gender Equality in Nigeria's Private Sector, which was co-published by IFC and the Nigerian Exchange Limited, also revealed that while women represent up to 33% of workforce level, they held only 23% of board roles, 17% of board chairpersons, 7% of CEO roles, and 20% of executive management roles, indicating a leak in their talent promotion pipeline. This data further establishes the business case for Nigeria's private sector to invest in women and reveals the need to do more to narrow the gender gap and address market failures, such as inadequate workplace policies that limit women's ability to access high-quality jobs and leadership positions. The data trend is also similar in entrepreneurship, where access to finance remains one of the biggest challenges for women entrepreneurs in Nigeria, where, according to the SME Finance Forum report, women-owned MSMEs face a $21 billion credit gap. This is very substantial. Layered on these, women face heightened economic vulnerability because of gender-based violence. The estimated losses to the Nigerian economy as a result of violence against women is at least 2% of Nigeria's GDP due to sickness, unproductivity, attrition, absenteeism, and related effects. Making even small inroads in closing Nigeria's gender gap can quickly yield clear results. According to a McKinsey Global Institute report, if women participate in the Nigerian economy at the same level as men, it could add approximately $225 billion in GDP by 2025. The IMF also estimates the potential for economy to grow an average of an additional 1.25%. The private sector is well positioned to directly address some of the issues and reap the dividends of gender equality. They can implement actions that promote bias-free workplace and ensure women participate equally as employees and entrepreneurs. These could include increased female representation in leadership positions, support for women-owned small businesses and supply chain diversity, and ending sexual harassment in the work environment to mitigate economic losses. Stock exchanges also have an important role to play in gender equality. Stock exchanges are formidable allies to facilitate gender equitable economic opportunities. They're uniquely positioned to influence the home markets in a way few others can. They can play a catalytic role in promoting sustainable development goals number 5 for gender equality and number 17 on private sector partnership for gender equality. Both goals are critical to galvanizing sector actions to increase women's participation in business and economic development. Given the role in helping to connect companies, investors, and policymakers to support sustainable development practices, they can rally the private sector to increase women's participation in business and economic development. Understanding the importance of this role, IFC partnered the Nigerian Exchange in 2021 and the IFC-led Nigeria to Equal Gender program to rally some of the largest private sector companies to invest in increasing women's participation and cross-employment and entrepreneurship. Through the 2.5-year program, we're working with CEOs of listed companies who have collectively made more than 165 tangible, time-bound commitments to reduce gender gaps across leadership, employment, and entrepreneurship. As part of Nigeria to Equal, IFC is building the capacity of the Nigerian Exchange to integrate gender as part of its core activities, to promote the Sustainable Development Goals, and provide support for listed companies to mainstream gender in their own operations. Further, in line with the UN Women Global Theme for International Women's Day, Gender Equality Today for Sustainable Tomorrow, it is important to recognize the contribution of women and girls around the world who are leading the charge on climate change adaptation, mitigation, and the response to build a more sustainable future for all of us. On this occasion of International Women's Day, IFC and the Sustainable Stock Exchanges have launched a guidance report on how exchanges can advance gender equality, which is shaped by real-world examples from stock, bond, and derivative exchanges around the world, as well as security market regulators. We especially want to applaud the Nigerian Exchange Limited on the progress to date, as clearly articulated by Mr. Onyema in his opening remarks a few minutes ago. As we engage today, I encourage everyone here to continue to explore innovative ways to break the biases that limit gender equality and advancement of women as leaders, employees, and entrepreneurs. By joining with others at the Ring the Bell for Gender Equality, we are creating even greater awareness of the challenges women face, but also of the real progress they're making, and we must celebrate the progress. I wish everyone a fruitful engagement and happy International Women's Day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ngirini, for the keynote address. Next is the fireside chat, moderated by the CEO, NGX Regulation Limited, Ms. Tinu Adiawe. She will be in the company of the Honorable Minister of State for Industry, Trade and Investment, Ambassador Miriam Katagun. They will discuss the topic, leveraging inclusive economic policies to break the gender bias in women's employment and entrepreneurship. Please remember that you can put in your questions via the Q&A box on your screen. Questions will be addressed at the dedicated Q&A session later on during this event. Over to you, Ms. Awe.
Thank you very much, Tolu, and good afternoon, everyone. I would like to stand on existing protocols. Good afternoon, Honorable Minister. I want to make sure that the Minister
good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be chatting to you with you today.
Afternoon.
Okay. It's a real pleasure to be chatting with you this afternoon on this very important topic, leveraging inclusive economic policies to break the gender bias in women's employment and entrepreneurship. And so I'll just go straight into it. My first question really that I'd like us to address is this issue that there's a widespread evidence of the economic and social benefits of women's financial inclusion. Women's financial inclusion, I think we all know, can create greater economic stability, prosperity for women, for their families, and certainly for communities, because they build assets. It enables them to be active participants in responding to family needs as well. So what inclusive policies do you think need to be promoted to facilitate the inclusion of women as essential contributors to Nigeria's economic development?
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks to the NGX for inviting me, and happy International Women's Day to everyone. But let me preface my response by first of all, stating that the contribution of Nigerian women to the economy has been established. There's no doubt about that. But we're also just 8 years to the SDGs, to 2030. So there's urgency. The urgency is really palpable that Nigeria has to move ahead in terms of gender equality. Then there's also the strong nexus between the political, social, and financial, whether it's inclusion or exclusion. So these three, are very much connected, and particularly the political, decisions are taken, policies are made around the table where you don't have many women sitting. So to come back to your question, I think for me, first of all, you look at the issue of education. Women that are educated are more likely to understand the simple principles of banking, or how to reach banks and so on and so forth. And if you look at it the other way, most of our Nigerian women, and I'm not talking about the urban areas, in the rural and semi-urban areas are unbanked, and you don't even have the spread of banks evenly across the country, not even agencies. And I've seen this when we're trying to implement the MSME Survival Fund. So there's that disparity in the spread of the financial services themselves. But back to the women. So a woman who is not literate is unable to see, she doesn't know how to go about accessing credit. She doesn't understand issues of collateral and so on and so forth. So by and large, you leave a large chunk of women out because basically they've not been empowered with the basic education that will enable them make the choices. Secondly, I think also you look at the issue of collateral. When even those ones that are educated that go to the banks, how do they raise the collateral? I know there are a couple of banks, particularly I can speak of the BOI, that have brought down the interest rate or credit rate to about, I think 8% now for MSMEs. But a lot more needs to be done in order to make financial products and services accessible. But I have three areas that I think we need to do some bit of legal and regulatory reforms. First of all, the Constitution, as you all saw what happened last week. That's a wake-up call, a call to action. We must have women in leadership positions because that's the only way that other women can come in and join us and be mentored and grow. Secondly, you look at already all the Ministry of Women Affairs. Last week, we approved a revised gender policy, which is very comprehensive. So that policy needs to be unpackaged and get stakeholders around and see in which sectors will we be able to make traction. And of course, I come to the issue that affects my ministry. When you have my ministry, Ministry of Finance, when you have waivers and tax reliefs and so on, there's no discrimination. It's just done as a flat playing field. Whereas it doesn't take into consideration the efforts a female entrepreneur has to go through in order to get to a certain point where her male counterparts are. Then also you have the issue of the broader societal issues of harassment, discrimination. But by and large, we have a declaration, the Buenos Aires Declaration of 2017, which encourages member states have signed on to make trade and development policies more gender friendly. So I think implementing that policy, also domesticating it, will help us go a long way in terms of ensuring that women are better included in our in the economy and in terms of financial services as well.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. I think you packed a lot into that statement. So we're talking about legal and regulatory reform, starting with the grand norm, the Constitution, unpacking the gender policy, and I think probably a lot of publicity around what is in the gender policy as well. You've talked about the broader societal issues and trying to help policies that will deal with those societal issues. A lot. Well, maybe we should go to my next question, which actually is some progress. I think when you think about the very entrepreneurial nature of African women and Nigerian women. African women are considered to be the most entrepreneurial women in the world, actually. According to UN Women, 27% of sub-Saharan African women are entrepreneurs, the highest rate in the world. 1 in 4 MSMEs in Africa is managed by a woman. 70% of informal cross-border trade in Africa is driven by women. So the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement comes with the promise of integrating MSMEs across Africa. And I think that's certainly one measure, a legal measure that has been taken, to your point one, that women can explore, to try and, get us away from some of the situations that we have now affecting women. So what I would like to know from you is, what policy initiatives do you think need to be implemented to ensure that Nigerian women in particular can make the most of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement?
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, again, I think, the AFCFTA needs to be unpackaged so that women really understand what is it about.
Yeah.
How do you move your goods within the framework of the AFCFTA from Nigeria to even the next country, which is Benin Republic? A lot of women-owned businesses we've seen are not formalized. So the very first step is getting as many women as possible to formalize their businesses. They need to understand what are the provisions made in the AFCFTA? What are the issues concerning standards, the quality of their products, the rules of origin, that these goods must have been sourced and produced in Nigeria? How do they go about exporting and repatriating their proceeds? How do they go about, issues around customs and shipment? And in this area, at least I'm glad to say that the Nigeria Export Promotion Commission has recently, with the International Finance Corporation, started a couple of workshops, and I've had the privilege popping into one, where they're training women to teach them what are the rudiments of exporting. How do you even link, as an MSME or a small industrialist in Nigeria, how do you get a partner in another country that's interested in your own goods? And how do you network and so on? So also we have several initiatives, like the central bank. This raised to 200 billion in FX repatriation. But again, these things have to be unpackaged and brought down to the level of not just the large industries, but the medium scale and small enterprises where a lot of our women are active in. Now, there are a lot of existing structures that we can leverage on. There's a National Action Committee on AFCFTA, for which female entrepreneurs can easily go into. There are several workshops happening, but again, I've had a discussion that maybe we need to create a platform where all these various interventions, because I hear a lot happening in the private sector, and then I say, wow, I didn't know the private sector were doing this. And then the private sector says, wow, we didn't know government was doing this. So perhaps we need to create a platform where information that will help women, are loaded, and then they're able to navigate their way. Then I think lastly, also to have a policy that will aggregate the MSMEs. I think with SMEDAN, we could do this, and matchmake them to large domestic and international enterprises so that they're able to grow, because the smaller MSMEs can feed our larger industries and so on. Then, of course, the issue of training and capacity building. We could talk a lot on this. So they need the training to understand, what is it all about, Otherwise, you carry your goods from Nigeria, you go, you take them to Ghana, they're rejected. You haven't looked at the issues of quality, pest control, if they are agri products, or by the time the goods get there, the goods are deemed not good for human consumption. So these are some of the issues, but definitely a lot is happening, but we need to put these things together.
Okay. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Those are quite a number of things that I think we can take into consideration with respect to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Moving on to something else, which is just the use of technology and women in technology. I think many people were surprised that approximately 76% of the successful applicants via digital platforms for the MTN Nigeria primary offer recently were women. So digital technology has a strong potential to close the financial literacy gap between women and men. How can technology be leveraged to further leverage and break these gender gaps, or at least close the gender gaps? Honorable Minister, what are your views on that?
Yeah, okay, yes, technology is a fantastic enabler. We've seen during COVID, the statistics show that e-commerce went up because of technology, and even this particular webinar that we're having. But if we look at 3 or 4 areas, the internet, digital platforms, the internet broadband penetration, I think it's improving in the country, because that's very important for you to have sufficient bandwidth to be able to transact business. And also along with that, the arrival of the fintechs, because there's a lot of opportunities that are being provided for women. But also, you also have the mobile phones, your smartphones. And for me, for those that are not in, internet reach, the backup is the smartphone, because for the women, they'll be able to access businesses. They'll be able to access videos, how to do this, because a lot of them, or how to export a product, or how to preserve something. So they're able to, at their own time, use their smartphones and be able to do a lot of things. But for the larger digital platforms, I think the opportunity is there for the aggregation of women groups. There are already existing women groups that are doing a lot, but they need to expand a bit and make these digital platforms known and available, so that they will use those digital platforms for capacity building, even for registering businesses. We're trying to cluster those who are interested in a particular aspect of business. Sometimes you're looking for information. There is recently we had this Qatar Economic Forum in Lagos, and you wonder how many female entrepreneurs knew about it, how many were able to participate. And from there, you see businesses just move very quickly once you use technology. And then, of course, for technology, it makes whatever production easier. So they're able to go online, see what new machinery they can get, which will make the production of their goods much easier and more acceptable. See what are the new standards in packaging, for example, and even in advertising. They will be able to see all these things and try and adapt, copy, or make up their own. So, but definitely technology is the way to go, but more information should be shared using digital platforms that are known to women enterprises.
Okay. Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. I'm getting a cue that we're getting short of time, especially because we have the digital closing gong and we have a panel before that. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you. I think we've gone over some of the issues. Certainly we need legal and regulatory policy change. We need to use technology to leapfrog. And we also need awareness. We need to build awareness so that female entrepreneurs in particular can know what is available and know how to appropriately position themselves and their businesses in order to be able to take advantage of opportunities such as that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement offer. Thank you so much, Honorable Minister, for sharing this time with us. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. Have a good day. Over to you, Infoniso.
Thank you very, very much. That was an enlightening discussion between Ms. Tinuade Awe and the Honorable Minister Ambassador Miriam Katagum. I will now introduce Mrs. Irene Robinson Ayawale, Divisional Head, Business Support Services Division at Nigerian Exchange Limited, who will be our moderator for the panel discussion. So in the spirit of recognizing the essential role that women play in our ecosystem, we would like to celebrate our very own Mrs. Irene Robinson Ayawale, who was recently featured on the second edition of the annual Women Leaders List of the World Federation of Exchanges for 2022. We are truly proud to have you as one of our leaders, and we look forward to making the most of your exemplary leadership style. Once again, we encourage participants to please put in questions via the Q&A box on your screen, and we will go into the panel session. Over to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mfon. I am indeed delighted and honored to be selected as one of the World Federation of Exchanges Women Leaders for 2022. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, depending on your time zones. Please permit me to stand on all existing protocols. Thank you, Ms. Awe and Your Excellency, the Honorable Minister, Ambassador Mariam Katagum, for such an enlightening fireside chat. For this session, we are focusing on a very related topic, which is how we can localize global trends in sustainable finance to break the gender bias in gender equality. To support the discussion, we have local and international specialists on impact finance, whose wealth of knowledge will greatly help us understand the potential opportunities for gender finance in Nigeria. So please join me in welcoming Robin Oates. Robin Oates is a sustainable finance specialist with UN Women, and she will highlight opportunities based on trends in gender equality as enshrined in the Sustainable Development Goals. She will also help to establish the business case for gender-themed finance instruments from a global perspective. Also join me in welcoming Kathleen Mignano. She is the Operations Officer, Inclusive Business, Gender and Economic Inclusion, IFC. She will share insights from the perspective of a global development finance institution, which includes a capacity development and investor perspective. Also join me in welcoming Tokunbo Ishmael. Tokunbo is the MD CEO of Alethea Capital, and she will share insights from the perspective of an African and Nigerian investor, and also share insights on the frameworks, market development, capacity building, collaborations, and the like required for the successful issuance of gender-themed finance in Nigeria, particularly gender bonds. Welcome, women. Thank you so much, ladies, for joining us today. So without further ado, I will direct the first question to Robin and Kathleen. So your respective organizations, UN Women and IFC, implement extensive programs aimed at promoting gender equality on a global scale. Could you kindly highlight key initiatives your respective organizations are implementing and how these initiatives have helped to advance the gender equality, especially in Nigeria? So over to you, Robin, first. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Irene, and great to be here. Thanks, everyone. So my colleague has already sort of provided some overview of what UN Women does, but essentially we're working on 4 distinct pillars around political participation, economic empowerment, ending violence against women, and women, peace and security. Now, underpinning all of that, and one of the enabling factors is obviously finance. So how are we driving an increased volume and quality of finance towards these gender equality objectives? So one of the things UN Women has focused on building capacity in over the last few years is specifically around sustainable financing. Now, if we look at the sustainable financing landscape, and I'm sure many of you are well aware of this, there is over $1 trillion of sustainable debt, which is essentially green bonds, social bonds, etc., that are being, or at the proceeds are being directed towards achieving these sort of sustainable priorities. But if we look at that $1 trillion in issuances that's just happened in 2021, we see that less than 1% of those issuances are directly aligned with SDG 5. So that's a huge challenge. It's also a huge opportunity. And so we've looked, and UN Women together with the IFC and ICMA have really looked at why that is. Why is such a small percentage of the sustainable financing or sustainable debt world being driven towards gender equality objectives? And one of them is around standards, that there was, until very recently, very limited understanding of what is a gender bond, what are credible gender lens investments. And so we've worked together with the IFC and together with the International Capital Markets Association to develop guidelines that sit underneath the social bond principles of ICMA that help issuers and investors identify what are credible use of proceeds and credible key performance indicators when we come to looking at gender equality. So I'll stop there in the interest of time and also hand to Kathy for her intervention, but just to start us off on that track. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin. Quite insightful that information is key and critical. So Kathy, over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Irene, and thanks to the Nigeria Exchange Group for hosting us today. It's really great to be celebrating International Women's Day together with all of you. I think as we've heard from all of the speakers so far, gender equality is not only a social and moral imperative, but also an economic necessity. So IFC provides investment and advice to help private sector companies close gender gaps in emerging markets, and also conducts research to highlight the business rationale to do so. So I'll highlight just a few examples that are making an impact in Nigeria, building on what my colleague Kevin mentioned earlier. On the investment side, there's our Banking on Women program, which works with financial institutions and private equity funds to unlock financing for women entrepreneurs. We've also invested in disruptive technologies like Trade Depot, which is a B2B marketplace that connects small retailers, many of them women entrepreneurs, with large consumer brand suppliers. And then on the advisory and research side, our women's insurance program has supported insurers to design solutions that improve the financial security of women. And we've also collaborated with Daraju Industries, a household good manufacturer, to help them identify the gender gaps for the women-owned distributors in their distribution network. And so, of course, I have to mention the Nigeria to Equal program that's been mentioned a few times already, but just to highlight that this program is spurring private sector companies from a variety of sectors to invest in increasing women's participation as leaders, employees, and entrepreneurs. This program provides support for companies to mainstream gender in their operations, and also research and advisory support, and brings the parties together on a peer-to-peer learning platform. So those are just a few of the different programs that we have going on in Nigeria, but I'll stop there, pass it back to you, Irene.
Thank you very much, Kathy. So from Robin, we've learned about the fact that information is critical, and that work is ongoing around the framework for gender bonds so that people can further understand the importance and the criteria for gender bonds. From Kathy, we've learned about the various programs and laudable initiatives that are being implemented here today to ensure and empower the women that we have. And clearly the Nigeria to Equal program that we are doing in collaboration with IFC. So my next question is to Tokunbo. So Tokunbo, taking a lead from what we have heard, how can sustainable finance, gender bonds, for example, that we've all mentioned, help to further close the gender gap and improve women's lives? And can you speak from a practical key performance indicator perspective, what investors may find attractive in a gender bond issuance?
Thank you, Irene, and thank you to the NGX for inviting me to this program, and happy International Women's Day to all my sisters, colleagues, and panelists today. So I'll start off by saying that at Alethea Capital, we particularly invest private equity money. So we're a fund that receives money from the likes of development finance institutions around the world. And in particular, we are focused on addressing funding towards addressing these SDGs that we're talking about. And specifically for today, we have a fund that addresses specifically SDG 5 as its prime objective, which is being intentional about channeling funding to female founders and to businesses that have impact on women. As we all know, very little money, around less than 5% of money that is invested in companies actually reaches women-led businesses. And for us, we go further to talk about women impacted businesses. So coming to your question about specific KPIs. So at Alethea Capital, we actually developed a gender lens framework. I think it was Robin that said earlier that there has been resistance because people don't understand, what is gender lens investing, what is a proper gender lens fund, what is a proper gender bond. So we started by creating a framework to show what it means to achieve certain metrics around women in leadership in business, around being intentional about backing female founders, about being intentional about the supply chains for businesses, about being intentional about the products that women particularly need, essential products, whether that's health, education, finance. So we developed a framework to look at the different areas of leadership, ownership, boardroom representation, job creation for women in the company, female employee engagement, and female engagement within the supply chain, and also products for women, specifically essential products. So when we're talking about performance of gender bonds, and even for gender funds that might be invested in equity, the key thing is what's the intentionality? So I've just laid that out, but then also what are the measurements of success? What quantum do we want? And oftentimes people ask me, oh, does that mean that you won't invest in a company that doesn't have a woman in the founding team? And I say, well, actually, I like to make change from the inside. So yes, I will invest, but one of my metrics over the first 12 months is how do we get a female owner in there with you, or female leadership in the boardroom, in management, and all the way down to the factory floor. And by the way, how do we make sure that your products are intentional about addressing affordability and access for women? So to talk about performance, we have to talk about these frameworks. And I think when you have these put in place, that then helps people to position the kinds of funds or bonds that they want to invest in. Now, given that we're speaking on International Women's Day that is themed Breaking the Bias, it would be remiss of me not to talk about those biases, because really intentionality, which is something that we talk a lot about from our perspective, means being able to address the bias of funding and being intentional about finding those businesses that are led by women that we know are good businesses. And like we said earlier, not just because of a moral imperative, but because by investing in good businesses, and particularly it's been shown that gender diverse businesses provide 20% or more superior performance to businesses that are not diverse in their management team. So that intentionality enables us to address a particular bias. We also, in addressing the financing bias, believe that we address the gender performance bias, because there's a bias that says that, oh, women-led businesses are charitable businesses, they're not going to scale, yada, 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 all the excuses that we can think about. And so again, we have to be intentional about investing in these businesses and showcasing these businesses that are indeed achieving this superior performance. And another bias that we definitely must not miss talking about today is the affinity bias, which is the bias that people will invest in people that look like them, people will promote people that look like them. And so we need to have more female representation in the decision-making offices, rooms, round the table, what have you. So I just wanted to make sure that we address that theme of breaking the bias.
Thank you very much, Tokumbo. Quite key points you have raised. Number one, around the need to have funds that are focused on gender-themed instruments. the need for companies themselves to begin to look at processes, procedures, and policies that will ensure that they are deliberately and intentionally trying to breach that gender gap. So I think these are very, very major points that have been raised. And clearly, we have talked about the need for a framework. And thank you, Tokunbo, because you have pointed to some of the framework that your organization has introduced, which are key. We've heard Robin also talk about the frameworks themselves that are very, very critical towards ensuring that we can come up with products that actually are gender-based. So one of the things I would now direct to Tokunbo is, because the local content is extremely important, and you've talked about some of the issues around having a fund, having those gender-based things that you are tracking. How do we localize the global trends that we have seen and the use cases we have seen that have proven to be quite effective globally? What would investors consider to be that critical factor, especially from an African context?
To be honest, I always smile when people say African context or whatever local context, because we are operating to global standards. And again, that's a bias to say, look, the standards to which we are operating, we are bringing the hard finance to address these problems. And so for us locally, we're not operating differently in terms of our assessment of these businesses. They're not charitable businesses. These are businesses that can scale, that can operate anywhere in the world. Indeed, we have some of our female founded businesses like Jetstream, which is operating an international logistics business, leveraging technology, businesses like Real Fruit, which is developing fruit and nut products in West Africa and exporting them to the world. Businesses like School Kits that are producing, they're locally producing high quality garments for the families, for schools, and educational supplies and accessories that you would find anywhere in the world. So people are already operating at an international standard. So when we talk about us as investors localizing, what we need to do is be more intentional and address some of these biases that I speak about. The Honorable Ambassador spoke earlier on about the AFCTA agreement and how women can leverage into tapping into the opportunities that come out of that. And I was glad to hear that, yes, there's training that's being given to women to understand the benefits and what have you, the standards and everything, which I think is great. But there also needs to be training on the other side of the decision makers and the people that are seeking to buy products, who need to remove the biases and broaden their look in terms of their selection of products, selection of companies, and indeed selection of women into management, board, and across all the way, I always say, to the factory floor. So localizing for me is being intentional because we're already operating at international standards.
Thank you very much, Tokunbo. I think that's a key point, that we're not talking about an African context, but a global international context and standards. And that is how we operate. So flowing from there, this question is to Kathleen and Robin. We would like you to share some practical applications of gender bonds from case studies of successful issuances. So I'll ask Robin to open the floor on that, and then on to Kathleen.
Sure, thanks, Irene. I think if I can just before going to specific examples, just to pick up on what Tokunbo mentioned, which is the intentionality aspect. And so when we look at developing, for example, in the sovereign context, the public sector context, a particular issuance, making sure that that issuance is embedded within an existing sustainability strategy. So what does that mean? So that means embedded within, for example, Nigeria's National Development Plan, that we're not just trying to, create something that sits outside of a holistic development plan. And I think I just wanted to pick up on that from a sort of intentionality perspective and applying that to the public sector perspective. I think it's also very important when we look at the example. So just to be clear, there's been no sovereign gender bond issued to date. So this again is an opportunity, I think, for relevant countries to have a look at what this could look like for them, to really distinguish themselves, and also to set the best practice and a benchmark for what investment in gender equality objectives and priorities could look like. However, with that said, we are working with a number of governments at the moment, looking at their national action plans, looking at their gender action plans, looking also at what gender responsive budgeting policies and practices are in place. And I think this is an area where Nigeria is leading, as well as looking at gender responsive budgeting policies and practices, using that as a enabling environment for us to then be able to identify relevant use of proceeds, so relevant programs and projects that can be funded out of the proceeds that are raised from a particular gender bond issuance. So there's been no government gender bond issuances to date. However, governments are looking at sort of broader sustainability bonds that have a very specific gender chapter. And I think key in terms of best practices when it comes to that is having a very clear identification of those use of proceeds, those projects that are selected. But then also, this is also back to what Takumbo mentioned, was having clear impact measurement metrics and frameworks that will measure the impact that those proceeds have on furthering the gender equality objectives. So that's sort of best practices, but I would also encourage any participants on this call to have a look at the gender bond guidelines that are put together with IFC, ICMA, and UN Women for those best practices and examples. And I think Kathy will probably be able to come in on the private sector side with specific examples on the gender bonds.
Great, thanks, Robin. Yeah, I think that just to keep it in context, like you said, with these global frameworks, we have the social bond principles, which really are high level, but overall guide the space, very similar to the green bond principles. There's also sustainability bond guidelines, which are relevant for those issuers that may want to address gender and climate together in one issuance. And then there's also the newer sustainability linked bond principles, which focus on achieving predefined targets instead of on use of proceeds. And these can be relevant for those issuers that want to commit to ambitious gender targets, maybe alongside climate targets. And in this case, the structural characteristics of the bond would change if they don't meet those targets. So I think it's important to keep those broad frameworks in mind. But looking specifically from a gender perspective, like Robin mentioned, we teamed up with the UN Women team and with ICMA last year to think, how can you really bring a gender focus into these instruments? And from the private sector side, I think reflecting on what Takumbo mentioned earlier, that intention of looking across your operations to identify and consider the gender inequalities that exist. So whether that's at the leadership level, among the employee base, across the supply chain, or in terms of the products and services that are being offered. So looking at those inequalities and then integrating a project that addresses that inequality into their gender, social, or sustainability bond program. So that gender project is then funded by proceeds. So for example, a company might use social bond proceeds to address a gender gap in the supply chain. So potentially implementing a supplier development project to help women suppliers meet procurement requirements. So that's just one example of how you could look across your supply chain to identify a gender inequality. And I stress that it's important for private sector issuers to consider all of the diverse types of gender inequalities that exist. Where we've seen the most uptake so far from private sector side globally is from financial institutions that are using the proceeds to on-lend to women entrepreneurs and help to close that access to finance gap. But this is just one possibility of how these instruments can be used. And there's really quite a large opportunity for corporates to get into this space and really expand beyond this narrow application to consider all the different inequalities that might exist and looking at how to use those instruments to address those inequalities. We've also started to see a few emerging examples of issuers using the sustainability linked bonds that I mentioned, to where they're committing to particular gender targets. So far, they've mostly been around women in leadership positions or in management roles and increasing that representation. So there is more and more emerging examples, but I think where we see the most opportunity to expand is really from corporates in looking at the different ways to use these instruments.
Thank you very much, Robin, Kathleen, Tokumbo. It has really been an information-packed few minutes. I can already see from the chat that our participants, like me, have learned quite a lot and are gearing to implement lots of the recommendations. So key things for us to note that from a public perspective, whatever that we are introducing should be aligned with our national action plan, as well as our agenda around women. That whatever we are doing, we should also focus on impact focus metrics. So let's have that impact focus metric so we can actually measure the impact of these bonds. We should be intentional, we should be deliberate about what we are doing. And indeed, companies and the public at large should recognize that introducing this type of gender-focused instruments would actually impact and ensure growth in the economy. So it's not like we're doing favors or we're trying to be discriminatory, but it's actually going to impact and ensure growth within the economy itself. Thank you very, very much for quite an interesting time. And so what I'll do is I'll look at the chat box right now. I think we have one question, and that question is actually addressed to the Honorable Minister. What I will do is just to summarize it basically. So this particular SME has created a solution that is addressed to the SDG 6, and it's a big concern that it has not been able to get enough engagements and input from both the private and the public sector. So it is asking around whether the government has initiatives and things to help them with advertising campaigns. So are there programs, Your Excellency, you talked about various capacity building programs that you have for SMEs. So the question is, are there collaborations or partnerships that can help them in terms of advertising so that they can reach a larger audience? Thank you, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much for that question. Actually, I think that particular MSME should, first of all, get in contact with the SMEDA, which is the Small and Medium Enterprises Agency, because the issue of advertising comes with a cost. So they have different platforms, and then depending on what product it is, we'll be able to piggyback on existing corporate entities that are doing regular advertisements on the TV, radio, and so on. So for example, if it's anything that has to do with skills, we can connect them with the Industrial Training Fund. They have regular programs. It could be something that goes with the Bank of Industry. It could be something that goes with the Standards Organization of Nigeria. So in any case, you could also write officially a letter to me, and then we'll be able to pick up the conversation from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. So we do not have any more questions currently at the chat box, but I know that there are a lot of questions that people may have. Feel free to send in your questions to us, and we will definitely send them over to whether the panelists or the Honorable Minister for a response, and we'll send our response back to you. So thank you for your time, and back to you, Tolu.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ayomale. As indicated earlier at the beginning of the webinar, our operating exchange, NGX, will join over 100 securities exchanges to commemorate International Women's Day and ring the bell for gender equality. I will now hand over to Mr. Temi Pupola, the CEO, Nigerian Exchange Limited, as the host of the closing gong ceremony. Welcome, Mr. Pupola.
Good afternoon, Tolu. Thank you very much. And Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me thank you very much for joining us today. And to start by saying thank you to everybody who has been a part of this historic event today in celebration of women. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's Ring the Bell for Gender Equality, the closing gong ceremony for that. Permit me, please, to stand on existing protocols. On behalf of the Board of Directors and the management of Nigerian Exchange Limited, it is my pleasure to welcome the Honorable Minister of Women Affairs, Dame Pauline Talon, OFR, as our special guest of honor for today's closing gong ceremony. At Nigerian Exchange Limited, International Women's Day means more than a day to celebrate the social and economic contributions of women. We recognize our strategic position as the engine of growth of Africa's largest economy, and we leverage this unique position to promote the adoption of sustainable business practices and reporting, as well as foster the growth of long-term sustainable finance. Today's event is an intersection of these aspirations. In promoting the adoption of sustainable business practices, NGX plays a leading role in galvanizing action towards achieving gender equality across our ecosystem. To this end, we commenced our 2022 International Women's Day celebration by hosting closing gong ceremonies to celebrate some of our most gender progressive listed companies that appointed female chairpersons and chief executives in 2021 calendar year. These closing gong ceremonies also served to celebrate the outstanding careers of the recent appointees, including, and permit me to list them very quickly, Dr. Omobola Johnson, the Chair, Guinness Nigeria PLC, Mrs. Bola Adeshola, Chairman, EcoBank Nigeria, Erelu Angela Adebayo, the Chairperson, NGX Real Estate, Mrs. Catherine Chiozo, the Chairperson, NGX Regulation, Mrs. Nneka Onyeli Ikpe, the Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer of Fidelity Bank PLC, Ms. Tinuade Awe, the Chief Executive Officer of NGX Regulation, and Mrs. Yemisi Edu, the Managing Director of First City Monument Bank Limited. During these celebrations, we were also joined by Dr. Mrs. Dere Awoshika, the Chairman, Access Bank PLC, Mrs. Oyeyimika Adeboye, the Chief Executive Officer, Managing Director of Cadbury Nigeria PLC, Mrs. Elizabeth Ebi, the Group Managing Director, CEO of Future View Group. Our partner on the Nigeria to Equal Program, International Finance Corporation, IFC, represented by Mr. Kalim Shah, the Senior Country Manager, Nigeria, who played a key part in the celebrations. The deliberations of today's virtual symposium, specifically the fireside chat discussions on sustainable policies to promote gender equality and the panel session on opportunities to leverage sustainable finance to break the bias, are at the very heart and core of a mandate as a securities exchange. As highlighted throughout the event, policy advancement is critical to break the bias and remove any restrictions that stand in the way of women achieving their full potential. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased now to invite the Honorable Minister of Women Affairs, Dame Pauline Talon, OFR, to officially close the market on this noteworthy day that is dedicated to celebrate women. She will be joining over 120 securities exchanges across the world and our global partners, the International Finance Corporation, Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiative, the United Nations Women UN Global Compact, and the World Federation of Exchanges to ring the bell for gender equality. Honorable Minister, we look forward to working closely with your ministry as well as with the global partners here present to promote the cause of gender equality in Nigeria, especially in the areas of gender finance. Please welcome Honorable Minister Dame Pauline Talon to deliver her remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Permit me to stand on all existing protocols. I'm indeed very pleased to have been invited as the special guest of honor at the Ring the Bell for Gender Equality Drive using the Nigerian Exchange Limited closing gong ceremony. I congratulate all Nigerian women locally and in the diaspora, young and old, who are blazing the trail and creating social and economic opportunities for all. I congratulate Nigerian Exchange Group of companies and the global partners on hosting this very important event. I celebrate you all. As we celebrate International Women's Day, allow me to join Nigerian Exchange Group of Companies and the International Finance Corporation in celebrating the recently appointed female board chairs and chief executive officers of some of our countries' largest and most historic companies. It gives me great joy to see that women are making very strong strides in assuming leadership positions in the private sector as well as other sectors of the economy. I would like to commend private sector collaborations, particularly in Nigeria, Two Equal program, who are helping to close the gender gaps. The Nigerian Ministry of Women Affairs promotes the development of women with equal rights and corresponding responsibilities. The objective of the ministry includes stimulating actions to promote civic, political, social, and economic participation of women, coordinating and monitoring women's programs, providing technical and financial support to women, non-governmental organizations, especially the National Council of Women's Societies. The Ministry of Women Affairs is also required to review substantial and procedural laws that affect women. The ministry also promotes literacy and health programs for women. In December 2007, the ministry issued a policy that addresses HIV and AIDS in the workplace, helping to ensure prevention, care, and support for those living with this disease. According to the World Economic Forum, it will take 265.6 years to close the economic gender gap at the current rate of progress. While there is and has been significant progress in achieving the gender equality, thanks to the global commitments such as the Sustainable Development Goals. We can only maximize women's economic potentials by implementing well-targeted policies and interventions to address current gender gaps and reshape gender parity for the future. The speakers today have shared elaborate insights in the potential of sustainable finance in addressing some of the most pressing social and economic challenges facing women across Nigeria. Clearly, the growth of the global sustainable finance market cannot only be attributed to profit the appetite, which is also very high because of the high potential of those instruments to address social and environmental concerns. Across the global financial industry, capital is increasingly being relocated to address sustainable development challenges such as response to the COVID-19 pandemic through COVID bonds and humanitarian bonds to address the humanitarian crisis in the Middle East. Social bonds, sustainable bonds, and sustainable linked bonds can help direct capital to reduce financial and economic inequality between women and men. Partnership at the heart of our intervention philosophy at the Ministry of Women Affairs, we welcome innovative initiatives that can create a future where women are economically empowered as business leaders and entrepreneurs and take on leadership positions in all phases of endeavors. We are open to collaboration with the Nigerian Exchange Limited, development partners here present, and all relevant stakeholders, local and international, who can help create their future through innovative solutions, including gender bonds. I commend the Board of Directors and management of Nigerian Exchange Group of Companies and the partners of the Ring the Bell for Gender Equality, United Nations Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiative, World Federation of Exchanges, and then the UN. Once again, I appreciate and thank the Nigerian Exchange Group of Companies and the partners of the Ring the Bell for Gender Equality. It is now my pleasure and honor that the bell goes.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for your wonderful remarks. And as we proceed to close the market, I would like to specially recognize the International Finance Corporation collaboration. Our partners on the Nigeria 2.4 program, they are represented by Mr. Khalid Shah, the Senior Manager for Nigeria. We're very proud of our collaboration with the IFC. I note that we're 1 minute past our regular closing down time. I think the women are thoroughly deserving of it. Again, I'd just like to invite everyone to turn on their videos. I will wait for the song to go, and then we will officially bring today's meeting to a close. Very much. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, that familiar sound is what you would have heard on the trading floor to signify that trading is closed for the day. I do want to congratulate and thank all our guests for joining us this afternoon. Thank you indeed, Honorable Minister, for your time as well. I would now like to invite Nkiru Balowo, who is the founder and co-chair of the African Women on Boards, to deliver the closing remarks for today's very wonderful ceremony. Nkiru, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Coppola. On behalf of African Women on Board, I would like to congratulate the Nigerian Exchange Group on the success of its International Women's Day Symposium and ring the bell for gender equality. I'm honored to be part of this important event, and I appreciate the opportunity to deliver the closing remarks at the closing ceremony. I would like to thank all the speakers for their insightful and engaging remarks and presentations. I equally want to thank and recognize the Honorable Minister of Women Affairs, Dame Pauline Talon, OFR, the Honorable Minister of State for Industry, Trade and Investment, Ambassador Mariam Katagum, Group MD and CEO NGX Group, Mr. Oscar Onyema, OON, and CEO NGX, Mr. Temi Popola, as well as all the partners, IFC, UN Women, UN Global Compact, the Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiatives, and the World Federation of Exchanges for putting together a highly successful International Women's Day event. As we've heard today, Africa is still significantly underutilizing 50% of its human capital, its females. From a private sector perspective, this is particularly damning because results and the actions that determine them should really be based on calculated, quantitative economic decisions. Gender inequality is a problem in itself, but so too is the way in which we view gender equality. To promote gender equality today for a sustainable tomorrow, I close with a brief outline of the following recommendations for the wider private sector. 1, gender equality must be redefined as a societal issue and not a women's issue. We now have irrefutable data showing how gender inequality affects wider society, not just the economy and the bottom line, but national security and our very existence. 2, private sector must lead the charge in constructing and reconstructing gender policy. COVID-19 showed that the private sector is an agile and impactful developmental force in its own right. Results could be equally dramatic if businesses were to take the serious threats posed by gender inequality as seriously as they took the pandemic. 3, private sector must effectively collaborate with the public sector if we are to achieve real results. There is a key opportunity for the NSC, for example, to spearhead a working committee with relevant government and development partners, including those here present. Another is the idea proffered by Ambassador Katagum that we invest in a digital platform that aggregates the different initiatives that exist in both the public sector and private sector. Information is key. 4, finally, as previous speakers have noted, intrinsic patriarchy and long-standing cultural biases continue to hold back progress in Africa. Less understood are intersectional issues and household dynamics that follow Nigerian women into the workplace. Therefore, for real and sustainable change, we must understand and take cognizance of African realities in designing for bias. Trainings must be equally focused on men, not just women. African Women on Board is taking this approach and partnering with private sector leaders and industry associations who have joined to co-create an Africa-led, Africa-centric gender equity certification program. The GEC serves as a sustainable accountability mechanism for organizations striving to uphold their commitment towards equal opportunities and equity in the workplace. In conclusion, our approach to gender equality must go beyond the traditional CSR and box-ticking exercises. The private sector must be leveraged to yield greater influence in the social sphere and bring greater gender balance to Nigeria and our continent at large. I thank everyone for joining in this important convening, and we look forward to tangible outcomes from our discussions today. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much, Nkir. I'm really glad that you delivered the closing remarks. Again, want to thank everybody who's joined us this afternoon, Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. And with that, we'll bring this very wonderful event and celebration to a close. I wish you well and have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much.